failure to plan is a plan to failure. So you really need to plan ahead. And that's very important because if you want to take time out, you'll need to apply for funding. You need to apply for an outdoor program.
Welcome to the Life As podcast, a series of conversations with inspiring people about what life is like in a number of roles you can do before or during cardiology training. I'm your host, Jonathan Bray, and over the next couple of months, we're going to bring you weekly, concise and insightful discussions. On behalf of the British Junior Cardiologist Association Starter, we're really excited to bring you this series. Today, I have the pleasure of being with Madj Protty, who is a Wales cardiology trainee and also a Welsh clinical academic trainee, WCAT, and he's just finished his PhD here in the lipidomics lab in Cardiff. Thank you very much for your time, Madj.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for hosting me.
So to start off with, I wanted to focus during this episode on mainly what life is like taking a period of time out to do research. So to kick things off, I just wanted to ask you to share your reasoning behind the decision to take time out of training to pursue a dedicated research block.
Okay, so for me, the destination has always been to pursue a clinical academic career. So, you know, when you go to an interview and they ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? Well, for me, I've thought a lot about this, both during medical school, during my academic foundation. And the destination that I wanted to end up in was to be a clinical academic. And one of the stepping stones, let's say, to getting there is to pursue a higher research degree, either an MD or a PhD. I went down the PhD route to get more time to do more research and to be trained in order to get closer to that ambition.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you briefly summarize what your research area is in?
Okay. So as a cardiologist, I am a big fan of things that stop thrombosis. So my research is into thrombosis. Previously, I've done a bit of work on platelets in Birmingham when I was there as a medical student, and before that, I'm looking at novel antiplatelet targets and looking at platelets both in bleeding and thrombotic disorders. When I moved to Cardiff for my academic foundation program, I had a look around to see what similar research themes there are about thrombosis. And I made links with the Cardiff lipidomic group, which is led by a group of scientists and a group of experts in thrombosis and hemostasis. And we are interested in the cell surfaces of platelets and white cells, and particularly interested in phospholipids on those surfaces, which mediate coagulation reactions. So without them, your coagulation factors, such as factor 10A, which is the target for rivaroxaban, without a procoagulant surface, these coagulation factors would not work.
Absolutely.
So my research project was to build on what we already know, to look at these phospholipids, to look at a subset of them called enzymatically oxidized phospholipids, which are produced in inflammation, and to see whether they are altered in patients with acute coronary syndrome and whether they take part in arterial thrombosis. Neither of these questions had been answered before. So my PhD was to get the ball rolling in answering them.
You've told me a little bit already before about all of the things you enjoy about clinical research, the fact that you can combine the two. Can you tell me a bit more about the advantages and the disadvantages, things you like and things you don't like, about taking time out to do research?
So I suppose the advantages is that you will have a period of time where you are dedicated into to research, dedicated to being trained in research methodology, in pursuing an idea that you are interested in, and in developing independent thought in the project that you're pursuing. Of course, there's a lot of flexibility as well in this time. So you are able to design your experiments. You are encouraged by your mentors to organize your own time. And you also pick up other soft skills, such as team management, collaborations, writing skills, and hopefully in the process of this, as a side effect, you end up publishing a few articles as well, which builds up your CV. So there's quite a lot of advantages to this, and networking is one of the biggest ones, actually, which we could talk about. The disadvantages of taking time out is a bit of FOMO, really. You feel like you're missing out on what all your clinical colleagues are doing. So some of your colleagues, of course, may not take time out of research, and then 3 years on, you come back to training as an ST4 and they are ST7. Yep. And you feel like, oh gosh, did I miss out on something? But actually, it's not like this. It's not a race to the end with clinical academic training. You know, it's all about the journey. The other disadvantage, of course, is that unlike clinical work where, you know, if you take a week off, it's okay. Someone else will cover the ward rounds and will cover the clinic and we'll be in the cath lab. In the PhD life, if you take a week or two off, that's it. You come back and you resume exactly where you left off. So you have to drive more of the work yourself. Now, that could be exciting. It could give you that sort of flexibility and drive, but it could also be relatively stressful at times. If you are based in the right group with the right support, then and with the right mentorship as well, and that could be mentorship outside of your group, people who've done this before, then you can get a lot of reassurance to help you overcome these obstacles.
Absolutely, and I think you make a really important point that in research, in stark contrast to the clinical sphere, you have a lot of creativity and you can make something your own. So we mentioned networking. Tell me some more.
Well, I think one of the key attributes for someone to be successful is networking. So that could be networking at multiple levels. It could be networking at a higher level. So, you know people who are in certain positions that might guide you with their wisdom about how to get there. Perhaps they are people who would listen to you if you have problems, and they could offer their opinion or just be there to listen to you and try and tell you whether your opinions are correct or not. So that's one form of networking. The other form of networking is networking with peers around the country or around the world who are doing similar work to what you have, and that could foster collaborations and ideas. And at least in your mind, it could reassure you that there are other people who are in a similar position to you. You're not the only one who's decided to take time out to do research. I think research networking is very, very important. And a part of the networking is the mentorship element, which is, asking people if you are stuck at a crossroads. If you have a number of contacts who could act as mentors, that would really help you. And I think networking and mentorship are both criteria of success in this career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked at length about with your advice, talking about getting the right mentor, the right person to lead you, the person who can give you the time, and that when you're considering to take time out like this, taking time to speak to as many people as possible and get as much information is really key. Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of our listeners would be very interested in hearing your thoughts and your insights on what your life is like in terms of your work-life balance. I know that in Wales it's different from in England, but I'm wondering if you could expand on that for us.
Absolutely. So it depends on what phase I am in. So when I was doing my PhD, I had quite a lot of flexibility in managing my own time. That did not mean that I worked less hours. I actually worked more hours during my PhD, but I had more of the flexibility. So, for example, I could pick up the kids from school, and in lieu, what I could do is on a day where my wife is off and she could look after the kids, I can go and do this X-ray experiment in the lab. But that flexibility was very, very important. So from that point of view, I think the research life gave me that added work-life balance. Of course, when you're in the clinical spheres, you're a bit more committed to your duties, of course, and you may not be able to finish on time or to take time off because there's a shortage in staff and you may not be able to request time off. Unlike in research, when I could just ask for annual leave the week before if I wanted to, it's not a problem. Now, when you combine the two together, you will end up with a mixture of both of them. So on my academic days, I have that flexibility. For example, I can go and meet a collaborator in Bristol, and I can set it up to be very early in the morning, so then I can have an earlier finish. And on your clinical days, of course, you are, again, bound to what duties you have, but there is an element of flexibility there as well. in that you can organize your academic time to fit around your clinical work and vice versa. So that gives you a bit of flexibility. There's no doubt that it is hard work and it needs a lot of organization, but it can work.
Yeah, so I mean, both of us have been academics in Wales, and I had, as an academic foundation doctor, I had a fifth of my time academic. That was very flexible. Tell us how much time you had with your WCAT leading into your PhD, and whether that was enough time not to spend all of, too much of your free time making up for supplementing you with academic work.
Sure. So the WCAT scheme is a run-through training scheme. So once you're appointed to it, it takes you all the way to your CCT. So in some ways, it combines both the ACF Academic Clinical Fellow and the ACL Academic Clinical Lecturer posts that are available in England, combines them into one. However, to draw a comparison to the English schemes, the WCAT offers you 20% research time. So that's 1 day a week. You can take it in blocks if you'd like to, but I decided to take it as 1 day a week. Now, to compare how that compares to England, the ACF scheme gives you 25% research time, often done as a block of 9 months at your third year of ACF. So in terms of time, it's exactly the same between WCAT and ACF, 20%, 25%. So in the lead up to the PhD, I think this is sufficient time for you to establish your contacts, generate your pilot data, and take it into a grant for external fellowship, for example, to be funded for your PhD. Of course, when you're a PhD, then you're 100% research time. But I think the limitations that I am suffering from at the moment is the postdoctoral time. So now that I'm on WCAT, I'm still on 20% research time. And of course, when you're postdoctoral, you need to go and apply for those grants, apply for that supervisory role. You need more of that research time. And in England, you get 50% research time. Now, some people might say that 50% may be too much time. Maybe they don't need 50%, but 20% I think is a bit too little. Somewhere in the middle would be that perfect blend, perhaps something like 40%. But again, it all depends on how flexible it is and whether your clinical TPDs and clinical supervisors support you in taking that time. So to give you an example, in my current job as an ST4, I had a chat to the clinical director of my directorate, and we've agreed to draw up a job plan whereby my academic day is rotated in on the equivalent of a less than full-time job plan, 80%. So I know that every Thursday, I'm never going to be on call, and I'm never going to be required to come into clinical duties. It's my protected day for research. And I think that support that I had from the clinical directorate in securing that day and protecting it meant that I could achieve a lot in this 20% research time.
Yeah, I mean, getting a job plan like that is perfect, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so you engage your clinical stakeholders as well as the academic stakeholders to make the best out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about getting additional funding. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to obtaining funding for your PhD? And was it difficult? How did you go about building your portfolio for that?
Absolutely. So a lot of us, some people will start their research careers later than others. And no one really teaches us about how to obtain funding, how to go about it, who are the funders, etc. And that's, again, where networking becomes important, either in meeting people who have been funded or speaking to potential supervisors who may tell you and recommend certain funders. And then depends what area of research you're in that you need to target your funders that way. So the traditional funders are the Medical Research Council, the Wellcome Trust, as well as charitable bodies such as the British Heart Foundation. So these are the funders that we can aim for. In some places, there's also local funding from NIHR, BRC type pockets as well, which might be accessible. And sometimes I've also seen some people who have industry funding or at least industry partnership. So you can see a Wellcome GSK type funding packages as well. So it all depends. But to speak about the mainstream funding, MRC, Wellcome and BHF, they all require you to have a project in mind when you apply. Some of them require the project to be written up as a project proposal. Others, like Wellcome, are now moving more towards a theme and a nominated supervisor, and they look more at the individual as opposed to the actual project. So to go back to your question, what I did is I sat down with my supervisor. At that stage, I had identified the supervisor that I wanted to do the work with and the theme that I wanted to work on. And we identified the funders that we were going to aim for, and we looked at their deadlines for the applications And I put it all in a timetable where I said, MRC deadline is January, Welcome deadline is May, BHF deadline is September. So my idea was to hit them all in sequence. So I started writing the project proposal, and it takes a lot of time to write that, because, you need all that pilot data to go in, and that should hopefully come from your work before the PhD. You need to cite all the relevant literature. Your supervisors need to read it. They need to give you comments about it as well. You need to have a robust plan in place. And then, of course, you need to work on yourself, because all these funders will look at three things. They'll look at your project, but they will also look at you and your supervisor. And all three have to align for you to have the best chances at being awarded the grant. So my plan was to go for all of them. I applied for the Welcome scheme in the WCAT consortium. So the Welcome is now funding consortia. So the Bristol, Cardiff, Exeter and Bath consortia is the Great West 4 consortium, the GW4. So Welcome assigned them that funding. So the appointment process happens through them. So I applied to them and I attended the interviews. And of course, that interview was a very comprehensive interview. I think there was about 10 people on that panel. And they ask you all sort of questions about your clinical destinations, academic aspirations, previous publications, your theme, your project, why do you want to choose this, etc. And I was successful in obtaining Wellcome Trust funding for that. And that has really been, I think, really empowered me to do my research as well, because it gives me a lot of flexibility and mentorship and support around it.
I see, absolutely. So you've talked to me about how, particularly with basic science, how, a lot of the time you can be unsuccessful with your, with funding, with your experiments going wrong. Some people might find this quite frustrating. Do you think that it's possible to, I know that you can talk from with regards to Wales, to obtain a consultancy position without having done a PhD or an MD?
Absolutely. I don't think doing a PhD or an MD is a prerequisite for a consultant job. And certainly there are lots of my colleagues who train me who are excellent consultants do not have a higher degree as an MD or a PhD. I think where it becomes important, well, you certainly need it if you're going to do a clinical academic career. Yes. And you will probably need it if you're going to be taking on research activities in a research unit or a university hospital. Cardiology is a very evidence-based career in general. So that's why you find a lot more pressure on cardiologists to do the higher degrees compared to some of perhaps other specialties where, there's less of that evidence or clinical trials ongoing, etc. So I think that's why some people go on to do it, just so they can have a good understanding and good grasp of the evidence and how it's generated. So yes, it's not impossible to get a consultant job without one, but then the probability of you getting that job are enhanced if you have the higher degree, because then you'll have something extra, something added to talk about, and then you can apply what you've learned into your clinical practice.
Absolutely. All right. So just to finish off, one question that we often end with is, do you have any specific advice that you would like to know before you started for trainees thinking about taking time out to do research?
Absolutely. So I had a saying, someone told me something once when I was a final year medical student, and I still use it to this day. They said to me, failure to plan is a plan to failure. So you really need to plan ahead. And that's very important, because if you want to take time out, you'll need to apply for funding. You need to apply for an out-of program. And a lot of the time, you can't get funding if you don't do some groundwork for 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. Also, you need to give at least 6 months to 1 year notice for the out-of program. And no one will grant you out of program once you are in the final year of training. So that means the window of opportunity for you to take time out to do the PhD is very limited. So if you think about it, you can't apply for the final year. You need at least 6 months notice to apply. So, using the current system as an example, if the final year is ST7, the last opportunity for you to go out of program will be sometime in ST6. Now, some people might say, oh, but ST6, that's the advanced modular training. I might want to come out before it. So that's, let's say, between ST5 and ST6. But then if you need to apply for funding a year before, then you're already at ST4. And if you need some groundworks, then you're already at ST3. So you need to plan all of this ahead, because if you think I'm going to walk into ST5 and then think about my research, it might be a bit late for you. It's not impossible. Some people have done it. But the earlier you plan, the better it is for you. So that's my advice to you today, is that failure to plan is a plan to failure. So plan ahead.
I think that's very good advice. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Majid, and thank you for your insights. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will find those incredibly valuable.
Thank you for having me.